Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum and good evening, everyone. I've been asked to come to speak before you on the topic of our theme in 10 to 12 minutes. Anyone who knows me knows that it usually takes me longer than that to even say my name. But I will try to carry out that task. And this is a particularly difficult topic for me, speaking here as a Muslim. And it's difficult for a number of reasons. First of all, it's very difficult to follow all of the fine speakers who came before me. I am, in fact, still in the process of processing many of the profundities that I heard. But secondly, it's important because of the challenge of speaking as a Muslim in today's world with credibility. And that challenge cuts in two directions. On the one hand, given the spate of unfortunate expressions of violence in many parts of the Muslim world, it is very difficult to express to non-Muslims the sense in which this is such a violation of the ideals of Islam. And it's understandable in that context that a credibility gap might develop. But I would remind us that we are, as humans, individually and collectively, not simply as good as our actions, but we are as good as we want to be. That is to say, all of us are afflicted with frailties. All of us are, on occasion, caught in the grips of pettiness, of jealousy, of our inability to see the humanity of those who oppose us or whom we oppose. But the real test of who we are as humans is what we aspire to be. And the real test of our character is the extent to which we are willing to look our failures in the face, acknowledge them, and get up and seek to overcome them. The second reason why it's so difficult for me to speak about this topic is that as an academic, I spend most of my time with young people. And young people have a very sensitive meter that detects hypocrisy. There's another word for it that I won't use. And when it comes to the issue of peace and love, one of the things that we have to be careful about, particularly in the context of how we appear to our young people, is that we do not present these values as goals in and of themselves that can often be used to undergird, to validate, and to perpetuate an unjust, an unfair, and inhumane status quo. That is to say that, do we invoke peace as a means of opting out of the struggle to make a better world? Is peace a goal in and of itself, or is it a means to a better world? And I think it's very difficult to speak to young people who face so much, who are fraught with so many challenges, who are in many ways so bewildered, whose idealism is smashed on a daily basis, and then to lecture them about peace in the face of a reality that is so far removed from any of their ideals. And the problem with this is that if we're not careful, this threatens to undermine the very value of peace itself, to undermine the very value of love itself. Because of love and peace are going to produce no more than what we have now, than what really is the value of all that love and that peace. That is the perspective of many young people. And so what I want to try to do is speak from the perspective of a Muslim that addresses the issue of peace as a means to resistance, and in such a way that our non-Muslim brothers and sisters can understand that this is a genuine ideal in Islam, and that it is established by the very founder of the religion himself, and that no one, no matter whom they may be, can claim to be a better Muslim than the Prophet Muhammad. At the same time, it's important, especially again for our young people, that when we speak of these lofty values, we speak in such a way that those values are grounded in what they themselves can understand to be the actual teachings of the religion itself. And nothing can be more effective than that, than the example of the Prophet Muhammad himself. May God's peace and blessings be upon him. With the limited time that I have, I want to try and share with you an actual event in the life of the Prophet Muhammad that demonstrates his recognition of the value of peace as a means of resistance. Peace as a means of disarming the enemy and denying the enemy the ability to foment war and confuse issues and to create clouds of suspicion and hatred and darkness, all those things that enable us to hide our true emotions, to hide our true motivations, and therefore to perpetuate realities that are in and of themselves unjust, untenable, and not consistent with what God would want. Around the 6th year of his messengership in the city of Medina, he had himself already been forced to leave Mecca. They threatened to kill him. While in Medina, he decided to make a pilgrimage to the holy house in Mecca. And at that time, Mecca was still occupied by the pagan Arabs of the peninsula. And although Mecca was a holy center for the entire Arabia, and it was supposed to be a sanctuary for all Arabians were supposed to be free to come to Mecca and to worship in freedom as they pleased throughout the peninsula. But when the Prophet Muhammad announced that he and his companions were going to make this pilgrimage, the Meccans decided that we're not going to allow this. And they wanted to show the Prophet Muhammad that they were able to stop him from carrying out this pilgrimage. And they also wanted to show the rest of Arabia that they were still in charge. And so they entered into this preliminary negotiation, out of which the Prophet Muhammad offered a peace treaty. The Meccans wanted to fight, but the Prophet did not want to fight. The Prophet understood that fighting does nothing but raise the defense mechanisms of the one against whom one is fighting. And when those defense mechanisms are raised, there can be no communication. You can have all the truth in the world, but if a person is defensive, they can't hear you. They can't process what you're saying. They're too busy trying to protect themselves. And so the Prophet did not want to fight. And this is something that is commonly unknown about the Prophet. He did not like to fight. He understood that the opening of psychological space is the means by which he can carry out that mission for which he is most responsible, and that is communicating the truth. And so what they decided was to have this peace treaty. But the Meccans still wanted to fight. And so they sat down to draw up the terms of the peace treaty. And the Meccans then tried to undermine the entire process. And so the Prophet started out by saying, in the name of God, the most merciful, the most beneficent. The Meccans stopped him and said, no, we will not accept that title. We do not recognize this most merciful, most beneficent to whom you refer. Wipe that out and write, in your name, O God. And their implication was that if you don't do that, all bets are off and we will enter into war. The Prophet Muhammad said, wipe it out. What do you want me to write? In your name, O God? In your name, O God. Then he proceeded with the treaty. This is what Muhammad, the messenger of God, agrees with the representative of Quraysh on. They stop him. Wait. He says, if I thought that you were the messenger of God, I would have not fought you for all of these years. Wipe this out. Erase this. And say, this is what Muhammad, the son of Abdullah. In other words, negating that the prophet was an actual prophet. And what did the prophet do? Fine. Wipe it out. Let's get on with the peace treaty. So then they enter into the actual terms of the peace treaty. And the peace treaty said this: Muhammad, you will not be allowed to make pilgrimage this year. We will not permit this. Perhaps you can come back next year, and we will vacate the city and allow you to make your pilgrimage. Fine. Second, anyone who leaves Mecca to join the Muslims in Medina without the permission of anyone who has authority over them, you have to send them back. But if anyone leaves Medina from the Muslim community to go back to Mecca, even in defiance of anyone in authority over them, we do not have to send them back. A double standard here. What did the Prophet say? Fine. Third, we will enter now into a 10-year peace treaty. No acts of aggression from either side, neither from the Muslim side nor from the non-Muslim side. And this is what the Prophet wanted. And finally, the peace treaty stipulated that everyone in Arabia is now a free agent. That all alliances that had been in existence in the past, they're all now up for grabs, and anyone who wants to rearrange or realign themselves with anyone else, they're free to do that. And these were the terms of the peace treaty. Many of the Prophet's companions, and one of the very prominent companions, asked the Prophet, why do we accept this humiliation? And the Prophet said to him, I am the Prophet of God. God would never humiliate me. The Prophet was using peace as a form of resistance. Peace as a means of denying the Meccans the ability to engage in war. That would have done nothing more than continue to raise confusion, to raise up lines of defense mechanisms, and distort the message that the Prophet himself was trying to communicate. Here, peace was a means to something beyond itself. The Prophet understood when he came to the outskirts of Mecca that this was likely to be the resistance that he would meet. And he could have entered into war with the Meccans. But he understood that there was something more important to come out of this. And what came out of this would later be reflected in one of the reports of a very prominent companion of the Prophet. There are verses in the Quran that read, verily, O Muhammad, we have granted you a manifest victory. One of the companions of the Prophet said, I know that many people think that this manifest victory that God is speaking about here with regard to the Prophet, I know they think that this refers to his triumphal re-entry into Mecca. but they are wrong. The manifest victory that God granted the prophet was nothing less than the treaty of Hudaybiyah, which he had reached 2 years earlier. And what we see is that in this atmosphere of peace, Islam was actually able to reach more people. And the number of people whose psychological defenses dropped and who were able to entertain what the prophet had to say quadrupled in number. In fact, it went up about tenfold. And what I'm saying here is peace is not simply a strategy to get what we want, but peace is a means of promoting an atmosphere in which people are free to choose the kinds of lives that they want to live. And this is a very difficult task for us to stomach in many instances, because there are so many ways of lives out there, or ways of life out there, with which we disagree. If we want to promote peace, and if we want to begin to promote peace, first, by looking at and asking the question, peace for what? We will have to recognize and acknowledge that this will be a difficult task, an extremely difficult task, a task for which even love will be challenged. And I think here it's very important for us to recognize, lest we end up defeated in our souls, that the most important love that we can have is love of God. Because that is the love that ultimately enables us to get beyond ourselves. It's as one of the great sages in the Muslim tradition said. He said, the important thing is not so much that you love God, but rather that God loves you. And what he was implying here is that for us to earn God's love, it means that we must engage in lives of service, in lives of service that go beyond ourselves. And in the process of doing so, we will encounter many obstacles, obstacles that somehow, in many ways, seem absolutely overwhelming. And it's at this time that I think we would be well advised to consider a piece of advice by that same Muslim sage. And he invited us to always remember that while we are limited in our powers, in our strengths, in our capacity even to envision, with God, all things are possible. And he says that if you were to go into a dark room in which you thought no one was there, and someone was to hit you, you would probably be afflicted with horror, because you don't know where it's coming from, and you don't know what's coming after that. If you were to enter that same dark room, but you knew that there was a friend in that room, and you ended up getting hit, you would probably turn around and say something like, "Would you stop playing, please?" You would not be afflicted with that horror. And what he's inviting us to do is to remember that we are not alone. We are not alone in this world. That God is here. That God is in control. And that God has the ability to answer our prayers. It's up to us, however, to make sure that we never carry ourselves in the way, that we seek to get God to work for us, rather that we always remember that we work for God. Thank you very much.